Hola a todos, soy Darío Aguilar Peregrina y aquí con mi co-host Stacy Hawks. Hello everyone, I'm Darío Aguilar Peregrina and I'm with my co-host and my best friend Stacy Hawks. Hi Stacy, how are you?
I'm good, Dario. I hope you are. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Amigos y amigas, empezamos esta nueva edición de este programa de literatura actual, ahora también llamado Literatura Today for our English audience. Estoy muy emocionado porque sin duda le agradecemos mucho a Graciela Echagüe. We thank Graciela Echagüe for her help and everything she has done for us. Y por supuesto, también mencionarles que comenzaremos una serie de pláticas aquí en Literatura Actual, donde les contaremos diferencias entre el mundo literario latino y el mundo de la literatura anglosajona. For now, we're going to start on these talks with my co-host, Stacy Hawks, about the differences between Latin and English literature. Every month, we're going to have different conversations, and also we're going to invite maybe some guests to our show. So please check it out because it's going to be a really, really great experience for you and also a great program. Vamos a comenzar este programa con lo primero. ¿Por qué esta diferencia entre la literatura latina y la literatura anglosajona? Stacy, we're going to start for this program. Can you tell me, please, in your opinion, what is the difference between the Latin and the English way of writing? What are your experiences on this theme, and also any advice you have to our audience? Please, Stacy.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there is some differences, but I also think that there is a lot of similarities in a way. American literature tends to focus on things like frontier, love and loss, anti-machine stories, or stories that kind of have some violence in them. Of course, we see that when we talk about Latin literature as well, when it comes to them taking on a story that has to deal with war. But the Latin way of writing is also very romantic and mysterious, and it talks a little bit about solitude and nostalgia and folklore. So some of those components are things that I also see in Appalachian writing. We see a lot of folklore. We like our history and our memories to be preserved, and we like to be romantic about the past, and we tend to set our things during a war era setting. So I mean, as much as we are different in our writings, we're also very similar in our writings. But, the best advice I can give is if you really want to jump into a good, Latin writer, try Isabel Adeland. She wrote the book Zorro, and it was like one of my favorite Latin works. And I actually listened to it on audiobook too. It was really good.
Amigos y amigas, thank you so much, Stacy. Amigos y amigas, Stacy nos acaba de decir las diferencias entre esta literatura anglosajona y latina en su perspectiva. Sin duda nos basamos más en esta literatura por dos frases básicas. La literatura anglosajona nos permite ver que nos basamos más en el desarrollo, nos basamos más en esto del personaje, ¿no? Y la literatura latina sin duda tiene esto del romance, el romanticismo, este amor por escribir. Pero a final de cuentas son literaturas, son similares, tienen la misma intención. Stacy, continuing with this, you were talking about this book you were reading. Can you tell us about this book? What are the differences between that book and, for example, I don't know if you have read El Quijote, de Don Quixote de la Mancha, or another Spanish book anyone you like, in your experiences, what is the difference between them, and also your opinion about that?
Sure. I think when it comes to something like Don Quixote, that is really a book about an individual who is, you know, kind of lost within himself, and he really wants to be this adventurer and take on all these adventures and fighting windmills and things like that. But and there's something to be said for that book. That's a great book for sure. It's been a year since I've read it, years and years since I've read that book. But Zorro was more romantic, and it was also more mysterious in the sense that we had a young man that went off and he come back and he ends up having to fight his government for, you know, for the rights of his people. And in doing so, he finds love with the El Capitan's daughter. So, you know, that's something that's very different, vastly different in those two works. But you know, I'm getting into more Latin authors and trying to read more of them as I go. We have a lot on our TBR during the podcast, during the seasons. But this book just sort of stood out to me as one of those that I would recommend anyone who would like to start reading that genre take a look at.
Of course, Stacy. Amigos y amigas, acabo de preguntarle a mi amiga Stacy acerca de este libro que leyó recientemente. Ella ha leído El Zorro, ya leyó un poco de Don Quijote también, y ella está interesada en meterse más en este mundo de la literatura latina, porque al final de cuentas, pues tenemos muy, muy buena literatura, al igual que los estadounidenses, la comunidad anglosajona. Así que, amigos y amigas, aquí estamos viendo cómo, al final de cuentas, lo que importa es el corazón de las historias más que nada. At the end of the day, Stacy, what matters on these stories, it's the passion that the writer put in those words he made. So I agree completely. Zorro was one of my favorites growing up as a kid. I normally watched the Antonio Banderas movie as a kid, so I really like that story. Another attempt, Stacy, for another question. Speaking of these characters of the Latin literature, can you tell us examples or any books that you read as a kid and you really love it? Amigos y amigas, les estoy preguntando a Stacy, ¿cuáles fueron sus libros favoritos de niña en la literatura anglosajona? Your favorite books, Stacy, comparing them with the Latin literature.
As a kid, I was really into the American Girl series, and amazingly enough, that series covers a lot of different girls throughout many years. Over the years, it went from the 1920s to the 1700s in the United States to even Latin American characters and Mexican characters. So it was really fun to read those different perspectives from those individuals from their different and respective time periods. That's a great kid start. A young adult start to history and also to learning more about culture and different cultures in the United States. There's also another series called Diaries of the American Girl, and you can read all these diaries. The same thing kind of applies here. You get young girls and young men from all over the country, from different ethnic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, including Spanish and Latin America, writing their stories out. And you get to hear in their own voice, in their own words, what it is they're going through at that time. So those are great reads for young adult kids starting out.
Amigos y amigas, Stacy nos acaba de decir sus libros favoritos de su infancia, y está en este diario de la chica americana y cómo convive con diferentes personas aquí en los Estados Unidos, y cómo está esta diversidad cultural de la gente latina, la gente hispana que está en Estados Unidos, y que sin duda marca a la gente de allá. Ella leyó estos libros de niña, y sin duda le encantaron. Friends of all world, Stacy have told us a really great recommendation. I'm going to check it, of this book series that you are talking about, because I haven't heard about them, honestly, but they sound really interesting because the differences, also including Latin characters and also American characters, it's a really nice setting, because as a kid I loved that, ¿no? Desde niño, le estoy comentando a Stacy, amaba esas historias que combinaban personajes estadounidenses, personajes latinos. As a kid I loved these stories that combine the American characters and the Latin characters, because you felt that you were in the story and involved yourself in that. Amigos y amigas, vamos a una pausa comercial en estos momentos y regresaremos con más literatura actual. Friends, we're going to a commercial break and we're going back here on Literature Today. And we're back here on Literature Today with my host, Stacy Hawks. Estamos de regreso aquí en Literatura Actual, amigos y amigas, con mi coanfitriona, Stacy Hawks. Stacy, we were talking about these differences between Latin American and English literature. So now I'm going to ask you, what were your favorite authors of all time? What are your favorite authors of all time in your literature? And I'm going to give you mine of Latin literature. Amigos y amigas, voy a preguntarle ahorita a Stacy, ¿cuáles son estas escritores o escritoras de la literatura anglosajona que más le gustaron a Stacy o que considera que son los mejores? Y yo hablaré sobre los que considero que son los más importantes en Latinoamérica. Go ahead, Stacy, your favorite writers.
Let's see. So this is a tough one. I have way too many. Probably like you, Dario. I love too many books. So I would say Vince Flynn is my number one. I love political action thrillers. That's one of my big things. My next one is Steve Barry because, hey, I've got to throw in some historical fiction there. Love all of his books, all of his stories about different things. And then for actual nonfiction reading, it's Stephen Ambrose. Stephen Ambrose, one of his books, one of my favorites of his is To America. It's It's a very beautiful book, and it's a really great historical book. It talks about our country's history from beginning to end, and he did a really good job on that book. So there's a lot of different authors that I enjoy and that I love that are nonfiction as well as fiction, but those would have to be my top three.
Ok. Stacy acaba de decirnos su top 3 de escritores y nos mencionó ahorita Vince Flynn. Vince Flynn, correct me if I'm wrong, Stacy,
Right.
is the creator of American Assassin, one of the books that was very famous. And also Dylan O'Brien was in that movie. I remember the adaptation. So it's okay, Stacy. We're on the same page of those stories. I really like action stories. Amigos y amigas, le comento a Stacy que este escritor, Vince Flynn, creó una historia muy buena. Si ustedes ya la vieron en cine, Asesino Americano con Dylan O'Brien, pueden checarlo ahí en Netflix si quieren. Es una gran historia y sin duda es uno de sus tops. También Stacy nos comenta que adora esto no solamente de la ficción y la no ficción, le encantan estos temas para esto, ¿no? Friends, Stacy has told us all with these 3 authors that I think they are really good. I have read some of them. The first one, I saw the movie, the book not so much, but I really enjoy it. On my part, I'm going to tell you, friends, 3 authors or 3 writers that I think represent Latin American literature. Amigos y amigas, ahora me toca a mí hablarles de estas 3 personas considerables para mí de que fueron grandes autores. First of all, I think the first writer I have in mind that is very important for Latin American literature, Stacy, is Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, Stacy, if you don't know her, she was a poet in the 16th century here in Hispanic Mexico, and she wrote poems about everything, politics, and everything Mexico was experiencing that in those years as a colony of Spain. So her poems are really famous, and there's also a phrase from her that is, I remember that well, is hombres necios que acusáis a la mujer sin razón. In English, it translates men that are not obvious to the teachings of women doesn't deserve the reason. I think that's the translation. But she was one of my favorite authors because she told everything, her experience growing up in Mexico in the 16th century. So I think she's one of the greatest. Ella yo creo que es una de los mejores amigos y amigas. Le acabo de mencionar a Stacy, que considero que Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz sin duda es una de nuestras mejores exponentes de la literatura hispana. On second place, Stacy, of the Latin American literature, I think is Gabriel García Márquez. Gabriel García Márquez, if you have heard of him, he's a very famous Colombian author that wrote many stories, and one of that stories I remember very well, it's Los árboles mueren de pie. In English, the trees die upside. It's the literal translation. I don't know what is the name in English, but Garcia Marquez stories, I think, are really good because combine the drama, the comedy also, and also the non-fiction things that we live in Latin America. Gabriel García Márquez considero que es uno de nuestros autores también tops de Latinoamérica porque te muestra diferentes temas como el drama, la comedia y por supuesto nos demuestra cómo se vive la vida, el día a día aquí en Latinoamérica. Entonces es uno top. And the last one, Stacy, I think is the top of these authors. I think is, and this is a personal favorite, is Santiago García Clairac. I have already met that author. He wrote, Stacy, a story, many stories, but he wrote 2 books that I really loved as a kid. That was En un lugar de Atocha, in a place of Atocha. That is the story of a kid seeing the March 11 bombings on Spain trains. I remember that story because I remember that there was a terrorist attack on those years. But the story is pretty damn good, Stacy, because the author creates a children's story, but at the same time it's mature. So you see how a kid was impacted of this terrorist attack. So it is a really great story, Stacy. I really recommend you to read that book. It's only in Spanish, but if you use translators or everything, it's a really great book, and it's one of my favorites. And also the second book is El Libro Invisible, The Invisible Book. The Invisible Book is another story, but it's a really sweet story because it's about a kid that moves up with his parents to another city, and he finds this book called The Invisible Book. So it's a really nice story because you see this kid trying to fill the spaces of this book that doesn't exist. But that book is for creating friends because he meets a girl, and this girl it's really funny because she says, "What is the invisible book?" We're going to find out that, and it's a very nice story. Also, I recommend that to you. Amigos y amigas, acabo de mencionarle a Stacy mi otro top de escritores y considero a Santiago García Clairac uno de los mejores. No solo porque lo leí de niño, sino porque también, sin duda, es un escritor que te muestra diferentes temas para niños y como para adultos. En un lugar de Atocha considero que es una obra maestra porque nos muestra cómo un niño vivió los atentados del 11 de septiembre, del 11 de marzo, perdón, en España. Y por otro lado, el libro invisible nos demuestra cómo un niño conoce a más personas gracias a un libro que aparentemente no existe. Ahora vamos a una pregunta más antes de irnos a la pausa, Stacy. We're going to another question, Stacy, a really quick question until the commercial break. And please, Stacy, can you tell us what is your favorite adaptation of these books, of these writers you have read? Quick. It's a quick question.
What's my favorite movie adaptation of these books I've read? Well, you know, I mean, hey, I liked American Assassin. I wish they found someone else to play Mitch Rapp, but Zara was definitely up there. I hope they make another one eventually. So those are definitely would be my favorite if I could see them remade or done, or do another story with Vince Flynn. Just do another one.
Ok. Amigos y amigas, Stacy nos acaba de mencionar que sin duda Asesino Americano le gustó de estas adaptaciones de libros a cine, pero que a ella le gustaría pues un remake de estas historias porque sin duda merece contarse más. Amigos y amigas, vamos a pasar ahorita a una pausa comercial y de regreso hablaremos sobre más temas aquí en Literatura Actual con su anfitrión Darío Aguilar Peregrina y Stacy Hawks. We're going back, we're on a break. See you then. And we are back here on Literature Today. Estamos de vuelta aquí en Literatura Actual con Stacy Hawks una vez más y su anfitrión Darío Aguilar Peregrina. Y estábamos platicando ahorita recientemente sobre estas adaptaciones de películas, de libros de favoritos de Stacy a películas. Y ahora viene la pregunta, sin duda. Stacy, you already talked about these characters, these inspirations, these books you have read, and please tell the audience. Also, it's a commercial for you. These books inspired Dividing Reach trilogy. Am I right or not?
Yeah, so when I was young, and I started reading the American Girl series, it got me involved in history, and I took off and decided eventually I was going to major in that, and I majored in that in teaching, and I just sort of fell in love with that type of genre of book, the historical fiction genre. Somewhere along the way, I also kind of fell in love with true crime mysteries and that kind of thing. So that's what inspired Dividing Ridge, The Unsolved Murder of Ella Brannick, my first book, and a North Carolina historian's award-winning novel, as a matter of fact. So that's one of my that's where that came from. And then of course newspapers and history also inspired, and true crime again also inspired my second book, Devil's Ridge. My third book is coming this summer, and we're looking forward to debuting that for everybody.
Ok. Amigos y amigas, acabo de preguntarle a Stacy acerca de estas inspiraciones que ella leyó desde niña, estos libros, estos autores americanos que ella leyó y cómo la impactaron para crear su trilogía, Dividing Reach, que por cierto, el tercer libro ya viene en verano. The third book is coming on summer, so please check it out. Stacy is a really great writer on these topics, on this great historical fiction, also crime fiction or non-fiction also. And she already won an award, so please check it out again, because Stacy is really, really talented. Amigos y amigas, sin duda, el trabajo que Stacy hizo con Dividing Reach nos menciona cómo se inspiró en estas series de las chicas americanas, de los libros de Dylan igual, y al mismo tiempo cómo ella combinó estas cosas para crear un trabajo original. Y de ahí viene la pregunta que quiero hacer con Stacy sobre por qué consideras, si es considerable que es mejor una adaptación de libro o una adaptación de cine. Stacy, another question I have to you is, what do you prefer at the end of the day, the books or the adaptation on any media you see? On this part, on your experience seeing this, Dividing Reach, if it is turned to a movie, what is your expectation for the people that have already read you, that like more, the book you wrote or the adaptation you were a part of it? Please tell
Sure.
us.
I would hope that they would enjoy both. I mean, if I'm in charge of the movie, you better believe it's going to be as close to the book as it can get, because really the book, in my opinion, any book is better than the movie a lot of the times. Now, that's not usually the case sometimes. Sometimes you find a diamond in the rough, like Where the Crawdads Sing. And if anyone's read Where the Crawdads Sing, they understand that movie and book were pretty close and they were really good. But, yeah, I mean, I would make it as close to the book as I absolutely could, because you want to draw in those readers, just with the movie, just as you did with the book.
Of course. Amigos y amigas, acabo de preguntarle a Stacy acerca de qué pasaría si se adaptara su libro a película. ¿Qué preferirían los autores? ¿Qué preferirían los lectores? ¿El libro o la adaptación? Y Stacy nos acaba de decir que muchos preferiríamos, sería lo mejor que ambos preferiríamos los dos. Pero claramente si Stacy fuera a dirigir la película o producirla en su caso, sería cercano al libro, porque ha habido ocasiones en que a veces los libros son muy distantes de las historias adaptadas. Sometimes, I really agree with you, Stacy. The books are sometimes very different from the adaptations that we see on movies. Recently, I saw a movie I don't know if you have seen it. Ready Player One. Ready Player One. I saw that movie a few years ago with a friend of mine, and we loved the movie. But then I read the book, and Stacy, you told us that many times the book is better than the movie, and I agree. But in this case, in Ready Player One, I really love more the movie than the book, or because you already saw everything on the screen, and I was really excited. Amigos,
Yeah,
le
those
estoy diciendo a Stacy de que sin duda de acuerdo con ella que los libros son mejores que las adaptaciones, pero a veces, en este caso con Ready Player One, a mí me gustó mucho y sin duda, pues yo preferí más la adaptación. Go ahead, Stacy. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's okay. Yeah, no, Ready Player One was a lot of visual. That was a big movie. I mean, all the pop culture references in that thing. It was just insane to watch. But I loved every moment of that movie. And I will admit that I have not read the book yet, but I plan to. It's still in my TBR. But I really did enjoy that movie. So that's good to hear that, the movie was sort of more, that kind of built a better world than the book did. And I think that's what all authors hope. I think they hope that visually their book and their story, is just as alive in the movie as it would be to them when they're writing the book.
Absolutely, Stacy. I agree with everything you said. And also, again, I think these differences between the Latin and English adaptations are really interesting because ahora me toca a mí, amigos y amigas. Now is my turn, Stacy, for the Latin adaptations of books or cinema. And I remember the adaptation of Como Agua para Chocolate, Like Water, Like Chocolate, is a very famous Mexican movie based on a book. So honestly, I preferred the book because the movie I didn't like it so much. My mom is a very big fan of that movie, but honestly, I didn't like it. So, and many people love Like Water, Like Chocolate, but in my case, not me. Yeah, and friends as also Graciela loved that movie. So we have here a really nice conversation about that. Amigos y amigas, sin duda, yo en mi caso, pues con Agua para Chocolate, pues a mí no me gustó tanto la peli, a Graciela sí le gustó más, Stacy no la ha visto. Stacy, you haven't seen that movie. It's okay, or?
Yes, I have seen the movie. I've seen the movie and I read the book. I did it for a class that I took, a literature class that I took. So, I mean, we got to see the juxtapositions, the differences in them. It was really interesting. I mean, I liked the movie in its way, but I agree with you. I think the book is a little better.
Okay, this is a surprise. Stacy saw the movie, my friends, amigos, amigas. Stacy vio la película y también el libro lo vio. Y pues, a final de cuentas le gustó más el libro. Y coincido completamente, o sea, a final de cuentas es esto de la literatura que a veces no se transmite tal vez muy bien a la pantalla, o puede ser que sí funcione muy bien. Another question, Stacy, I have on this theme of adaptations. Recently, Warner Brothers announced there is going to be a new adaptation of the Harry Potter books for HBO. In my opinion, I really love the movies as a kid. I don't really want a remake because I think it's too premature. But I think many people are telling me that they are really on board with this idea because many things of the book were passed on the movies. So, what is your opinion, Stacy, on these topics about remaking things that work in the past and things that didn't work of these adaptations of books? Amigos y amigas, voy a preguntarle a Stacy como una pregunta final para literatura actual sobre estas adaptaciones recientes que estamos viendo y cómo están habiendo muchos remakes de estas historias ya en los libros, en las películas. Entonces, so Stacy, please tell us your opinion.
So I mean, I'm of the school of thought of if it's not broke, don't fix it. So if it did really well back in the day, and it was a great success. It was a huge success. My brother had all the books. He got me starting to read the books, and I read the books, and I went to the movies and got to see again the juxtaposition. There were some things left out, I know, I due to time's sake probably, and some other things. But if they want to make it as a television series for kids, I don't know how well that will go with this next generation, but I mean, it's worth a try. But I mean, I like the original stuff.
Amigos y amigas, Stacy me acaba de decir algo muy cierto. Pues a final de cuentas, si algo funcionó, famous phrase, if it works, don't, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, si funcionó en el pasado, pues realmente para qué hacerlo de nuevo, pero a final de cuentas, pues es una decisión pues, para la nueva generación y pues hay que respetar eso, ¿no? Porque a final de cuentas estas adaptaciones también son. Another example, Stacy, of these new adaptations for ending this program, Lord of the Rings, the new Lord of the Rings of Amazon versus the Lord of the Rings of the 2000s. What is your opinion of this remaking of this story?
I really enjoyed the first Lord of the Rings movies. We read the books when I was in elementary school. That was kind of the thing back then, was to read the fantasy books, the fantasy series, the Hobbits, the whole 9 yards. So, to see it visually and to see it on a big screen like they did in the movies. And they had some great actors for those movies as well, portraying those characters. I don't know how it gets any better than that. I have not heard that they're going to do a remake of that. I have heard they're going to do a Twilight series on TV. I mean, they're getting ready to do that again too. So, I mean, I think it's up to the next generation whether or not they'll enjoy it as much as we enjoyed the originals. But I'll stick with the original.
Okay, I agree completely with you, Stacy, because at the end of the day, the originals are better, but many people sometimes disagree. En este caso, amigos y amigas, le pregunté a Stacy como pregunta final, ¿qué opina acerca de estos remakes? Recientemente escuchamos Harry Potter, recientemente escuchamos El Señor de los Anillos. Historias que funcionaron en el pasado, pero que ahora para una nueva generación puede que funcionen. A final de cuentas, hay que darle una oportunidad a la nueva generación, ¿no? Y por eso, con esto terminamos el programa del día de hoy. Y quiero decirles que muchas gracias de nuevo por la oportunidad. Stacy, any last words for today's program, our first program here in Literatura Today, to the audience? Also, if you want to promote your books, also you are open to do it.
I just want to say thank you all again so much for inviting me to be a part of Literature Today. We hope that everyone finds a great book to add to their TBR, or at least hear some great advice from some great upcoming guests that we get to have on this program. And just continue to follow me and Dario on social media. You can find me at The Writing Wall on Twitter, or at Writings on the Wall 85 on Instagram. We also have a podcast you can tune into, and Dario was one of our guests.
Of course, Stacy. Thank you for that opportunity on those days. Amigos y amigas, me despido. Agradezco mucho a Stacy Hawks por su gran apoyo en este día. Agradecerle a Graciela Echagua igual. Y a ustedes, público, por estarnos viendo aquí en Literatura Actual. Soy su anfitrión Darío Aguilar Peregrina, con mi anfitriona Stacy Hawks. I'm your host, Darío Aguilar Peregrina, with my co-host Stacy Hawks. See you then. Take care. Nos vemos, amigos.
I never made it, but I know